This is the Future of the Future show. I am your host, Mateo Berbejicio. Today, we are exploring a topic that's close to my heart and probably to yours as well if you ever sat on a classroom or graded a stack of essays, and that is education. Now, imagine a world where grading isn't a core, where feedback is instant and personalized, and where AI doesn't just assist, but transforms the learning experience. Sounds futuristic? Well, the future is now. Joining me today is JC, a sociologist turned entrepreneur who is on a mission to revolutionize education through AI. He's the founder of Learnovate, an edtech startup born out of his own frustrations with grading. JC's journey took him from academia to the forefront of AI-assisted education, and he's here to share insights on how technology is reshaping the classroom. In this episode, we will talk about JC's transition from academia to entrepreneurship in data science, the inception of Learnovate and its approach to AI-assisted grading, the current landscape and future trajectory of AI in education, opportunities, risks, ethical considerations, and so much more, right? So whether you are an educator or a student or just curious about how AI is changing the way we learn, this episode is for you. JC, thank you so much for being here.
All right. Thank you very much for the kind invitation, Mateo. And so just to give more context, I am still an educator. I am still actually at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And I actually developed Learnovate's PreGrade product, which is an AI-assisted grading product. I don't think too many people would be happy with AI fully grading everything. There needs to be a human in the loop. That's exactly what PreGrade is. I can talk about that more later. But it was really a situation where I was addressing my own pain points as an educator, where I actually created this product.
Very good. And thank you so much for the very, very good clarifications, JC. With that in mind, can you share more about your background and what inspired you to get into the field of entrepreneurship related to AI and education?
So my background, this is probably going to be a longer answer than you're expecting, but I promise that it is not uninteresting. So I'm actually an American living in Hong Kong. Um, I graduated, like many graduates from my school, I went and became a management consultant in New York City. And I did that for a couple of years. Then 9/11 hit, the economy turned sour, and I was like, you know what, I really want to get a PhD. And my PhD is in sociology, because I really wanted to look at the ways economies would develop. And I was looking at global development from the angle of social network analysis. And for some of you who are familiar with it, you understand that it is across social and physical space. So I was looking at the ways in which different cities across the world were connected to each other, wrote a dissertation on it. But everything I was doing was heavily quantitative. In fact, social network analysis is one of the most analytical and mathematically rigorous disciplines within the social sciences. So here I am getting a PhD from Stanford and researching social relationships and their contribution to business. And it's almost an occupational hazard in that situation to be sucked into entrepreneurship and the business school and startups. So I did my first startup as what we called the chief scientist at the time. Now, what we probably call a data scientist today, as for a startup that was being spun off from Stanford GSB, the Graduate School of Business. And I did that for a couple of years alongside my PhD. It didn't quite go anywhere. It did Startup Chile within your region, and it lasted for a while, but it never quite made it, right? After I did my PhD, I did what most unemployed sociologists do, which is to go teach at a business school. And that's how I ended up at HKUST, the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, because my professors were saying, yeah, there's only like about 20 schools we'd want you to go to globally, and HKUST is one of them. And so for a while, I was a research track academic, and I have to be honest with you, I didn't find too much satisfaction doing that. So I went back to Stanford for a year as a visiting professor, spent some time thinking about what I wanted to do with my life, and decided I wanted to be an entrepreneur. But I also wanted to keep a connection to academia. So I became a teaching adjunct back at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology and started actually working on automating survey research. And eventually that became one of the first AI startups in market research. That was going, it's still around today. My co-founders are really running it. I kind of stopped doing it actively about 5, 6 years ago. And then I got sucked into more teaching. And I got sucked into something called business analytics, which is the application of um, various technologies to analyzing data for business, largely based off of what I did for the startup, but also because I actually wanted to teach more. And then COVID hit, um, and I found myself sitting in front of a Zoom monitor, um, just trying to deal with two massive problems. First, students were cheating on all their online tests. The second problem was that because I couldn't do any other kind of assessments, I was grading tons and tons of essays. And it got to the point where I was spending a day and a half out of my life every week grading essays during the semester. That's too much. So having had a little bit of experience with what we called NLP back then, natural language processing, and what we call generative AI today, I was like, hey, why can't I use this to grade essays? So my university at first wanted me to focus on developing an app to help catch students cheating on online exams. That was a good idea. That got some traction, and then COVID ended, and there was actually much less interest in that. And that's right around the time when ChatGPT came out, and I was like, yeah, you know what? This is the missing link needed to actually grade essays using AI. So at this point, I already had a company, Learnovate, and I kept on pushing alongside that. In the meanwhile, I was still at HKUST because some of the more senior folks knew that I was working on AI in education. They were like, yeah, now we need AI experts. You're an AI expert. I was like, I'm not an AI expert. They were like, yes, you are. So I got pulled onto HKUST's task force, and then HKUST joined. It was the second member of an organization known as the Digital Education Council, DEC. It is meant to be the Davos of higher education. And you have a lot of forward-thinking people there. I think they're up to more than 100 university members now. Um, so I was one of HKUST's two initial representatives to DC. I got pulled into fairly high-profile speaking gigs for instance, UNESCO and the World Economic Forum. And then people started having this idea that I was an AI guy. But something I've been working on the whole time is to get AI in education working, specifically AI and essay grading. Although I have to be honest with you, my interests are quite a bit broader than that. So I've still been very actively engaged in the AI and education kind of field.
Very good. So we will get into Learnovate and everything that you're doing there. But I have one follow-up question to your story, which I found very interesting. You studied the relationship between like different cities in the world and how they are connected, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember reading that sometimes there are more similarities into, let's say, a huge capital like Buenos Aires and Sao Paulo and New York than
Mm-hmm.
Buenos Aires and other small cities in Argentina, right? So there's kind of a size to cities that connects big cities around the world and the type of people that live there, something like that. I'm asking from an ignorant point of view, without going like super detailed, what are some of the big factors that connect big cities around the world that you found during those studies?
Interesting. I didn't expect to be asked that question, but I'm very happy to answer it because it is something that I'm actually still very interested in. Um, to make a long story short, there's been a debate about like globalization. What
Right.
is globalization? And it turns out that globalization is really regionalization. Even before the latest trade wars and the tariffs and all the disruption it's caused, 80% of global trade occurred within major regions of the world. East Asia, Europe, North America, Latin America. Then you had the secondary regions that were closely affiliated with one of the big regions. South Asia, for instance, is very closely tied to East and Southeast Asia. And by secondary, I don't mean that it's less important. They're less closely connected to the rest of the global economy. Latin America, of course, is very closely connected to North America.
Right.
The Middle East and North Africa, very closely related to Europe. And in that sense, um, small cities are only connected to big cities within their own countries.
Right.
Like, for instance, if you think of France, of basically everything has to go through Paris, right?
Right.
And you get that pattern when some countries, Japan, it's Tokyo, Seoul in Korea, um, and of course, in a place like Argentina, Buenos Aires, right?
Right.
Um, now, there's regional centers where you have connections with the national centers. A good example of a regional hub that everybody likes to talk about for Southeast Asia, it's clearly Singapore.
Right.
Bangkok is a major regional center for Thailand, the Jakarta, a major regional center, I'm sorry, national center for Indonesia. But really, where all these national capitals and national centers connect to are the regional hubs. Now, Hong Kong is a major regional hub. Singapore is another major regional hub, Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia. Um, then you also have like in Latin America, there's a few different contenders. Mexico City is obviously very important. Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires all have these kind of roles. In Africa, it used to be like Cape Town, but now it's more and more like someplace like Kenya, right?
Right.
And Dubai in the Middle East. Now, the heavyweight in North America is New York City. The heavyweights in Europe are London, Paris, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, right?
Right.
And Asia, we've already talked about. So it turns out that all of these regional centers are connected to each other, the two most important being New York City and London. But for a while, Hong Kong was a very close third.
Right.
And of course, Hong Kong's dropped off a little bit, Singapore's up, but like Hong Kong is still top five. And it turns out that the only connections across regions take place in these regional hubs.
Oh, okay.
Some of the most important national hubs, like a Tokyo, like a Seoul, like a Beijing, like a Paris, also have substantial like global level connections, right? But aside from the largest national hubs, all the ones there where you can actually cut across regions, it's all these regional hubs, and that's why we call them global cities. So once again, a long-winded answer. Hopefully you found it interesting,
Yeah.
but I find this pattern very interesting.
No, I love it. I love it. We could JC, we could have another episode just about that, right? We have to turn back to education, but it's so interesting, and one of the reasons it's interesting to me is also my father is he works in urbanism, right? And so the
Mm,
design of
mm.
cities and stuff like that, and so all the the connectedness of cities and patterns, etc. I think it's super interesting. But anyhow, um, let's go back to uh, tell me more about what you're doing right now with PreGrade and Learnovate, and how it aims to address some of the challenges that you were seeing, and how does it work?
So, wow, this is a big, big question, right?
It is.
I also do a lot of work with corporates. I advise a private equity fund. I also advise several startups. I also do a lot of executive education for some of the big banks. And something I'm seeing is there's two fundamental approaches to approaching AI innovation.
Okay.
One is to leave all the processes exactly in place.
Okay.
And then there's one step in the process that's a headache. What you're going to do is use AI to replace it. The rest of the processes remain in place. The people remain in place. Nothing really changes. You've just basically turned manually typing in the content of a form into the computer, into scanning and having AI read the form and auto-populating it for you. So it's a labor saver, it's a time saver. It's something that very few people would find objectionable, or so you'd think.
Right.
The second approach is to take AI and rebuild entire processes around AI. And for instance, let's say the government asks a big bank, hey, we need for you to actually give us a report on this person whom we are investigating. Um, One way to do it is to actually have the humans do everything. Another way to do it is use a reasoning model to say, hey, these are the things that a specific kind of government request usually involve. We're going to automatically put together the documentation and then we're going to send it off. Hopefully, there's a human in the loop, right?
Right. Right.
Um, but you've gotten rid of the entire process of this is a checklist you need to follow. You need to start by getting this. You need to do this. Instead, you're just using AI for almost everything except for the last minute human review. So something like this is going to be much more disruptive to everybody and everything. And it's got a chance to kind of revolutionize everything.
Right.
Now, I used to think that the what's going to happen is everybody's going to be focusing on the low-hanging fruit, which is to keep the processes in place and replace specific steps in the process
Yep.
with AI. But what I'm starting to see more and more today, it's there's such big opportunities to replace entire processes altogether using a category of AI we call reasoning models. They're very new, less than a year old. They're also extremely powerful. And what they can do is think processes through and figure out what it needs to do on its own. How well, that's a question that's open to debate, but for the most part, they can actually think through the basics of what they need to do and plan around it. So these are what we call agents today.
Yeah.
Agents are simply apps wrapped around a reasoning model.
And those.
So having said that, it's like, please continue.
No, no, no. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, but going back to your original question, I mean, education is at a precipice today, right? We're standing at the edge of the cliff. Do we jump? Do we not jump? Do we learn how to fly?
Right.
And I think that's a pretty good analogy. But let me pause for a second. I mean, so what do you mean by solving the problems education, addressing the challenges?
No,
Let
mostly.
me ask you.
Yeah. So, well, there are many directions we can take this question, right? So there's the larger education as a whole and the challenges education has as a whole, and we will get into that later. But what I mean is more about assisted grading, AI assisted grading. And I want to learn more how your product is working there, what it does, right? And how does it work?
All right. So my tool is a very good example of keeping processes in place, keeping the people in place, and just taking a particularly time-consuming step in the process and automating it. So let's say you're at a very well-funded university like Stanford, where I actually did my graduate degrees. You're a professor. You give an essay assignment. What you're usually going to do is to create a rubric. In other words, instructions on how to grade the essays. And you're going to give that stack of essays to your grading assistant, who's different from a teaching assistant. A teaching assistant is helpful for almost everything, but a grading assistant only grades.
Okay.
So, hey, grading assistant, here's a stack of papers. Here's a rubric. Go grade and come back to me. And usually they go off grumbling. Nobody wants to be a grading assistant. They come back in 3 weeks. It's marked haphazardly. So because it's really an angry grad student that's doing this, right? So you have to go back and regrade everything, check everything. And by the time the student's getting back, a month has passed. Now, this is actually at the well-funded universities. Most universities don't have this kind of money. So basically, the professor or the TA himself or herself will have to do everything.
Right.
So what my product does is to exactly replicate the role of the grading assistant. You give a rubric, instructions on how to grade an essay, and you give a stack of essays, whether they be submitted online in, let's say, Microsoft Word or PDF, or submitted in person, handwritten. And I think handwritten essays will be making a massive comeback because you can't actually judge whether a student wrote any other essay any other way, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the AI will do a first pass at grading. The AI will do a first pass at generating comments. And then everything will come back to me or the TA. And the TA spends time looking through everything and then hands it to me, or I look at everything directly when I don't want to bother the TA with it and make some changes as appropriate. And then we give everything back to the students. So that's a process. And I would say the benefits are threefold. For the educator, it saved him or her a huge amount of time. I'm at the point where I myself can save about 80 to 90% of the time involved, having taught with the same essay with the same rubrics or a similar essay, because you can't keep the questions the same every year, right?
Right.
I know what works, what doesn't. PreGrade, my AI solution, has about a 95% accuracy rate. Only about 5 times out of 100 do I need to actually go back and make any changes. But it's still my responsibility to look at everything because students are fine with AI assisted grading. As soon as you actually have AI replacing the human grader, they'll come out with pitchforks and they're going to come after you, right?
Yeah.
And I don't blame them because I think of the same way. So the benefit for the instructor is it saves a huge amount of time. The benefit for the students is they get the essays back in 3 days instead of 3 weeks, and they get much, much, much better comments. AI is very good at drafting huge amounts of comments. For a one-page essay, we can actually give like a 1 page of comments, right?
Right.
Or if that's too much, we can cut it down. There's different settings we have in the technology, but you can give very detailed comments about anything. And then for the administrator, the other key benefit is that it reduces student complaints.
Right.
Because when you have a human graded essay, sometimes the instructor, regardless how dedicated, they get tired, right? Their eyes get tired, they get distracted after about 60 essays. And I don't know, if you're really, really disciplined, that's about as many essays as you can do in one 12-hour sitting, let's say. You're dead
Yeah.
and you're going to be making errors. And the quality of the grading at the end of that is going to be not as good as the quality of the grading at the beginning of that. So what I've found is the process that I've been using, which is having the AI grade first, then looking at everything myself and making sure I make changes. The output is in Microsoft Word. I use track changes to make any changes so the students know what changed. Basically, I don't think I've had a single complaint about this hybrid mode of grading in the past, I don't know, 3 years. I've been using various forms of this technology at various stages of development. So grading complaints take up a huge amount of time administratively. And for the administrator, having not only fewer complaints, but more fundamentally fair and more consistent grading, it's a huge plus.
It is. And so it's exciting because, like you said, right? You at the beginning you said there are different ways you can go about implementing AI. You can keep the process as is and then change a few steps of the process, right? And leverage AI for a few steps of the process. Or you can rethink the entire process. And that's, I think, what you were getting before of, hey, do we learn to fly Do we jump off the cliff? What do we do, right? And so let me push the question further now that we understand exactly what your product does. Let me push my question further and talk about education as a whole and some of your thoughts on how AI is enabling educators to rethink the process entirely, right? What are the opportunities? What are some of the things that you think about, right? Beyond grading essays. Some people talk about having dedicated tutors, right? You could be teaching your class, but then each of your students has an AI agent or model or system that is helping them on their own learning path and having more immediate feedback that it's almost impossible for you to give to an entire class all the time, right? Just an idea, but when you let your wildest ideas run, what do you think will happen in the field of education?
So what's actually really interesting is that this is something that there's a group of people in higher education who are very much leaders, right? My colleague Sean McMinn at HKUST, Julia Chen over at Hong Kong Polytechnic, being two examples. Singapore Management University, SUTD, Singapore University of Technology and Design. Um, some of the Australian schools, like somebody like Jason Lodge over there. They've Simon Bates at the University of British Columbia, a bunch of the people at Bentley, North Carolina. They've been leaders, and they will be leaders. And they've actually been thinking about this for a long time. There's some of the European schools are forward thinking too. But I think the undisputed number one school in AI and educational innovation is right where in your neighborhood in Latin America, Tec de Monterrey. Hector and some of the other folks there are extremely advanced. And they have a massive infrastructure to kind of like test it across their 30 something different campuses. Most people don't realize that Tec de Monterrey may be the single most advanced AI enabled educational institution across all of North America, including the US. In the US, some of the schools are extremely forward thinking, like Arizona State. Most are kind of hung up by bureaucracy, and North America has been generally slower to adopt, although Mexico, of course, is more of a leader in some respects. Now, what those people have been thinking about is, for instance, at the Association of Pacific Rim Universities workshop that HKUST hosted about a year ago, we actually speculated about the future of the university. And there's different futures that we could come up with. One was at a pure research lab. One was actually AI takes a very active role in kind of co-teaching. One was a traditional academy where there was no AI, right?
Right.
The angle I was pushing is basically greater integration of higher education with the workplace, where like you start getting internships and the students are kind of like simultaneously working on internships and applying what they learned in courses right afterwards in their workplaces as part of a supervised learning program involving both the university and the workplace. And that's the model that we are actually using at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology's MSBA program, Masters of Science and Business Analytics program. And that's a lot of my own work right there.
Okay.
But I would say that even this group of extremely forward-thinking people were caught a little bit off guard because the world caught up to education.
Yeah.
What do I mean by that? Higher education is under siege in most parts of the world. You look at what the Trump administration has been doing to the US universities. The only thing surprising about what the US government has been doing is that for a while it looked like the Ivy League was going to fold. You thought that the Ivy League would actually have the greatest amount of staying power. And yet, I mean, Columbia folded very, very quickly.
Yeah.
It was quite some time before Harvard accidentally grew a backbone, right?
Yeah.
And the Ivies can only resist and only so long because they have huge endowments. What is it? Harvard has 50 something $billion. That will last them a long time, right? But what about all the other universities, all the public universities, the smaller private schools, where all of a sudden you're actually cutting funding. At the same time, you have increasing immigration barriers. The schools are not as welcoming of international students as they have previously been. And that's a huge revenue source. It is the mainland Chinese graduate student that's been actually feeding a lot of these universities for a long time, right?
Right.
And all of a sudden, there's been a pushback against it. Although supposedly Australia was going to limit their entry, I heard the number of new immigration entries into Australia just hit a new high in the first 5 months of this year.
Right.
So, I mean, a lot of times there's a hype exceeds the reality, but there's no question that higher education is under siege. It is inefficient, ineffective in a lot of ways. And there's portions of higher education that are primed to be ready for the future, especially the portions that are tech enabled, and especially the portions where you do more practical integration of the workplace and education. But there's a lot of instructors who've been teaching the same class for 30 years.
Yeah.
They don't want to change their slides, right? They have PowerPoint 30 years ago. I guess they did, right? And they haven't changed any of the content in business school. There are some professors using case studies from the late 90s.
Right.
Um, so basically, we just experienced basically asteroid strike on the world, right? And the dinosaurs are dying out.
Right.
And we're at the stage where the dinosaurs are starting to feel hungry.
Hmm.
And there's needs to be a rethinking. We need to rethink first, what is the purpose of education? AI is going to be so much more powerful today, especially in the future, where it's going to be able to outcompete a lot of humans.
Yeah.
To survive in this era, you need what we call critical thinking skills, metacognitive skills. You need to be looking very carefully at what you're doing and why you're doing it. Most people don't do that, right? And most classes don't teach that. So we need to teach an entirely new set of skills in the age of AI. And yet, the old school instructors are very resistant of change, right? So the purpose needs to be rethought. And then the second thing to be rethought is pedagogy. How are we going to teach it? Are we going to prohibit the use of AI? And or are we going to actually actively teach students to use AI? And some of that is starting to come into clearer focus. For instance, my colleague Sean McMinn and I are teaching an AI and critical thinking course. It is an optional core course. In other words, it's one way to fulfill the core requirement at HKUST for our undergrads. And what we've done is to look at different ways where we can actually combine AI and human thinking to enhance both instead of actually just cracking human intelligence. The metaphor that I use is that of an egg. So I don't know if you were in the US in the 80s,
No.
but there was a commercial during the war on drugs. What they showed was, hey, this is an egg. Crack the egg, start frying it, show the frying egg. This is your brain on
On
drugs, right?
drugs.
This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. And then the metaphor I use is now let's make it an omelet. And so that class has gotten some very good reviews. For instance, Sean and I won what they call a GMA award in London last December for that class. We're quite proud of that. And we've gotten a lot of very good feedback. Students seem to really learn from the course. But the approach that we use is first, we're making it part lecture, but part active learning.
Right.
So the active learning part is best practice before AI, right? But you still need some lecture to kind of like deliver it. But we're in the process of moving the lectures online, not like Zoom, which is a terrible way to teach, but through what we call asynchronous online, which are recorded videos, short clips. You actually go through a clip, take a short quiz. If you get the quiz right, then you get to go on to the next one. You need to actually do all the review before the active learning session in class.
Okay.
And then active learning is, yeah, we're going to give you a problem. We're going to put you in teams. We're going to ask you to use what you learned in lecture to figure it out. And like one of the exercises that I use, for instance, now do you understand prompt engineering? I want you to figure out how to automate the prompts. Because
Okay.
of course, this is how you make reasoning models, right?
Right.
So that's the kind of thing we're doing with the student in that course. The other thing we're doing is we're actually combining um, both with AI and without AI modalities. The students do a group project where they write a long essay that they're expected to use AI on in terms of brainstorming, in terms of drafting, in terms of research. They're used to expected to use AI for everything. Now, that being said, the metaphor I use is that of Jarvis and Tony Stark. Are you a Marvel fan?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah. So Jarvis can help, but in the end, Tony Stark is responsible. Jarvis does the great grunt work, but Tony Stark claims the credit because he actually must take responsibility.
Right.
And so we actually judge, grade, assess that essay that way. In the end, you're responsible whether or not you used AI or not, and whether or not it's an AI generated content, it's got to be good. The stuff I've seen coming out of that class for that project are some of the best essays I've ever seen, period.
Wow.
And the students are taught how to use the essays, AI tools correctly, and it really makes a difference. If done right, AI human integration really does produce superior results. That being said, we don't want the students to get too dependent on AI. So we have 3 in-class essay quizzes.
Okay.
Handwritten, no electronic devices, just their brains, a pencil or a pen, and paper. Then what we do is run those essays through PreGrade.
Okay.
And basically, PreGrade can read scanned handwritten essays. It does it quite well. In fact, what it's going to do is even identify who wrote which ones and organize it for you, right?
Right.
And upload everything. So so HKUST is going to scale that class up to, I don't know, 240 students per semester. And then that's 3 essays. So 240 times 3, that's 720 if I'm doing this right. When am I going to grade 720 essays per semester?
Right.
That's just torture, right? So that's something you couldn't do without pre-grade. And then, so it's ironically, AI is enabling us to move stuff offline and help students not use AI. So I think you're going to see a clever combination of that. The other big component is reflections, right? And now you're starting to even get to the point where you might be able to use AI to grade reflections, which is really hard, but we're not quite there yet. We're getting close. Um, and that way the student thinks metacognitively. In other words, thinks very carefully about the way they are thinking about things. And that's actually a key part of the learning experience. And my co-instructor, Sean McMinn, he's really the expert at a lot of these things. But I've actually had a chance to work with him and learn from him. And these really are fantastic practices.
It's amazing. So will you say that it sounds very optimistic? I hear you speaking about the way that you are leveraging AI in education, and it makes me, makes me want to be part of your class. Honestly, it's
Oh, thank
exciting.
you.
It's encouraging. It's the right mix, I think, of how to think about it. I love it, right? And what you're saying, you're seeing great results from it, and that vision of augmented intelligence, human plus AI, human, times AI. Um, it's very exciting. Are you optimistic when you see that? Do you think that you were using the metaphor of dinosaurs and a meteor? Are we evolving to something better, or do you have concerns about some of the risks that are involved with all of this?
Oh, I have many concerns. So if an asteroid strike will wipe out the dinosaurs, then you might have entirely new institutional and organizational configurations, the mammals coming over and inheriting the earth, right?
Right.
So those are like basically the non-university players, the specialized education outfits, executive education companies that might be actually taking over the space. But the universities aren't going to go away because dinosaurs didn't go away. In fact, there's almost as many dinosaurs today as there were in the past. Because guess what? Birds are dinosaurs.
Right.
So can dinosaurs grow wings, grow feathers, become agile and nimble, and actually survive, and not only survive, but also thrive? So eventually we're going to see the mammals and the birds taking over. The old school dinosaurs, they're going to be starved into submission, or they're going to grow wings and grow feathers and survive, right?
Right. Right.
Um, so I think in the right hands, AI can be a huge, huge, huge benefit to educators. But the question I ask is this: how many educators have been properly trained on AI? I mean, Sean and myself, the folks at Monterey Tech, um, the people in Australia, Singapore, Europe, who are leaders in the space. I'm not worried about them. They're going to do this right, right? I mean, there's a lady at the UC London who's actually been pioneering all this, right? And somebody like her, um, no problems, no concerns. Somebody like us, we're pretty knowledgeable. We should be actually, I mean, we don't have to be Rose Luckin to be able to do a good job with this. That being said, what about the vast majority of university professors? And what about the administrators who don't really understand? Hong Kong University, not HKUST, but a different university in Hong Kong. When ChatGPT came out, within a month, they went from banning ChatGPT outright to saying that they're announcing that they're going to provide ChatGPT to every single professor, staff member, or student at that university, right? Of
Right.
course, at HKUST, we've always been forward thinking, but also reflexive, right? Reflective. So we are a little bit slower about making these decisions, although we are still very, very fast, right?
Right.
Um, and Hong Kong U actually has very strong administrators like Professor Holliday, who was a VP of teaching and learning. He's a very, very smart man, right? And very forward thinking. But what about all these other people who are not forward thinking? And the administrators who are like, yes, I have FOMO, fear of missing out. Everybody
Right.
else is doing it. We have to do it. Then the teachers, they don't want to use it. In fact, a lot of teachers and even university professors are starting to get more and more afraid of being replaced by AI. So they're going to actively sabotage any attempts to introduce AI. In fact, that's the biggest problem we have at Learnovate with PreGrade. The people who've used it love it, swear by it. But the people who are resistant, they're they won't actually say the truth about why they're resisting it, and they'll make up all sorts of excuses why universities shouldn't use it. But in the end, what they're really afraid of is losing their jobs because AI is going to replace them.
Yep.
And that's actually, I used to think those fears were overblown. And today, um, there's a combination of two things that are actually going to combine to make the apocalypse really kind of break point. But before I get into that, I've been speaking so much, I haven't given you a chance to ask any questions.
No, no, please keep going. I want to know the two things that will make that apocalypse. You are getting into a very interesting point. Please keep going.
All right. So the first thing that's actually changed my mind is that reasoning models are becoming far more powerful, far more quickly than I ever imagined.
Right. Right.
A year ago, Gen AI was stupid. It was just you basically typing in a question, and all Gen AI was essentially massive autocomplete.
Hmm.
That's all a lot of this was, autocomplete. And today, the reasoning models have moved on to the point where they're very smart. What they do is the first stage is they look up like how humans usually do this. And then, okay, the humans usually follow a 10-step process. Let's actually do one step at a time. And then that actually makes models much more powerful, right? So you're seeing all sorts of stuff that reasoning models are able to do. Have you used Perplexity's deep research tool?
I have, and I compare it. I'm using that one, ChatGPT's, Grok, just contrasting all of them all the time, right? And it's insanely powerful.
And ChatGPT is, of course, more powerful than Perplexity Deep Research. I use Perplexity Deep Research because it's free. I get 3 free um, queries a day, right?
Right.
And even if it's the weakest version, it's so incredibly powerful. And I'm very fast at doing research. It can save me about an hour and a half at a time, maybe even more, right?
Yep.
But for somebody who's not as good at research as I am, imagine how much time that's going to save them.
Yep.
So that's just the first generation of commercialized reasoning models. What's going to come next? So a lot of what I do for the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology is that I actually have student teams for the master's program, Master's in Business Analytics, MSBA. What I do is I find corporate projects and usually paid internships for these students. And then what they do is build advanced AI solutions for their clients with the hope that they like the students' work, that they'll hire them. Right. And so far, it's looking pretty good, although the Hong Kong economy is not very good right now. So I'm proud of them. I'm proud of their work. Some of their projects are being reported all the way up to the CEO, and these are just student projects, right?
Right.
But what they're doing is essentially they're building their own reasoning models, specialized reasoning models, specializing in doing the tasks that they're intended for, that are far less complicated than like Perplexity or OpenAI, like ChatGPT or like the reasoning models, right? O3. Yep. But it's still so much more powerful than anything that the companies had before.
Yep.
So that creates a potential for a lot of white collar jobs to just get wiped out.
Yes.
The second thing that's going to accelerate this is that companies, especially the good ones, don't like to fire people. They are always trying to trim some of the fat, but in general, they appreciate their employees and they're looking for excuses not to fire them. And everybody said, yeah, we're doing this for innovation to not replace our employees, but to try to do things that our employees cannot easily do right now. Now, then President Trump comes in with a trade war.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, the world is looking at a potential economic depression. And then all the companies got scared. Because they got so scared, their mind shifted. So within 2 weeks of the Trump tariffs being announced, some of the same people who were talking about the need to respect and protect their employees were shifting their tune and say, hey, the company needs to survive. We need to use this as a cost-cutting tool. We need to start cutting jobs. So between the additional capabilities of reasoning models and then the massive shock to the economy that is actually making companies really careful about conserving cash and cutting people, I think we're looking at the potential for a massive number of layoffs. And with schools being such bloated entities, I'm not going to get into exactly how they're bloated, but they are. A lot of what they do, even for their core functions, is just useless. The outputs are not useful for anyone. And yet we're spending huge money on these dinosaurs, right?
Right.
And then you have protected interests. You have people within the system who have a lot of their vested interest who are protecting themselves. Let's call them protected interest, right?
Right.
They're not going to want to change. So how are you going to make them change? well, there's going to be basically nothing for a lot of these institutions to eat, especially since a lot of students are getting unhappy with higher education because they're not learning practical skills that will help them get a job and actually get think more critically, right? Because
Right.
so much of higher education is about memorization.
Yeah.
All this memorization, it's going to become almost useless. It's important to understand and learn it once, but you're not going to get a job and be able to maintain the job because you've memorized stuff. You're going to need to actually think about how to use AI outputs better. And a lot of critical thinking is not being taught at universities. Um, Now, that being said, there's always innovators, and some universities are much better at it than others. HKUST Business School, I think, is a lot more practical in that regard. So I'm pretty happy about that. The business schools are generally better. Basically, the natural sciences and engineering, a lot of it is about still memorization. So, I mean, what's going to happen? I mean, you're going to need to find efficiencies somehow.
Mm.
You're going to need to use technologies like pre-grades somehow, right?
Yep.
And pre-grade was specifically designed not to be threatening to teachers, to basically make their jobs easier. Yet, you're looking at a situation where there's other tools that are designed to replace other type aspects of teaching and even learning, right?
Yep.
So I'm not quite sure where this is going to go.
So you have background in sociology and you understand the economy, and the the one thing I get very anxious sometimes, I have to acknowledge, and the white collar jobs being wiped out, that makes me very anxious, right? I'm an attorney by background. I run a software development company, and those are all jobs that I look at them and I go like, 10 years from now, it will change drastically, right? But there's so much that's at risk. We can augment a lot of what we're doing, and we can be better, and we can dream big, and that's amazing. But the truth is, even juniors, right? You were talking about juniors being hired, that those are the ones that are getting hurt the most, because now I
Yes.
get I can use AI to do a lot of stuff that I will hire a junior for. I'm not hiring them anymore. So how are them going to get those job experience that brings the critical thinking skills and all of that? So I get anxious, but then I think companies and therefore governments need consumers. And if you need consumers, you need a consumer base that has some sort of income to be able to spend. Otherwise, the whole global economy crumbles. Do we agree on that?
Yes.
Do you wonder sometimes if we are moving towards that universal basic income type situation, or I mean, it's going to get like crazy at the beginning and clunky, and but is that where you're going? Is that where your mind eventually ends up, or you don't think that's ever going to happen?
So I first had that discussion about AI replacing juniors and juniors not learning through grunt work with one of the leading Silicon Valley lawyers who's a good friend of mine. I won't say who, but he was using AI in his own work before he was popular, and but he was really afraid that people would stop hiring juniors, and so that we actually wouldn't be able to train the next generation of lawyers, right?
Right.
And this is somebody who's extremely tech savvy, a former NASA engineer who's turned lawyer, and he leads one of the biggest practices in one of the biggest law firms in Silicon Valley. He works with all the funds, right? Now, I do think there might be a silver lining though,
Okay.
because right now we're looking at two disasters, and the two disasters just might be canceling each other out.
Okay.
One disaster is AI replacing so much work, but we might need AI to replace so much work in the next 10 years, at least in the developed world. And I believe Latin America is starting to experience the same thing, which is declining birth rates.
Yeah. It
People
yeah.
just aren't having kids anymore. In Korea, to basically maintain the same population level, you really need each woman, each man, I guess, each one. But like there's more men than women. Men die early, women don't, right? So each woman needs to actually have 2.2 kids
Yep.
to maintain this stable population. Right now, the number in Korea is 0.7. In other words, they're having one-third the number of kids to keep the population stable. In Hong Kong, people don't talk about it, but if you get rid of the effect of immigration, the native Hong Kong folks are having 0.72 kids. Japan is furthest along. Korea is fastest moving. China maybe even faster moving than Korea from going into demographic surplus to demographic shortage.
Yeah.
And Europe's been like this for a very long time, Italy being one example. But it's only the settler societies, the United States and the UK and Australia, that have been actually avoiding this. But the reason for that is because they've been taking in a lot of immigrants from places like Latin America.
Right.
Now you shut off the flow of immigrants, like a lot of these societies are, then all of a sudden you're going to start having a shrinking population too, because the people who have been actually Americans for several generations, they just don't have kids. So we might be looking at a potential economic collapse due to shrinking consumer work basis, but maybe by replacing human workers with AI workers, we're actually going to find a balance.
It's no, it's amazing, and so
Yeah.
many follow-up questions, right? Do you think there's it's weird. Sometimes I think about it and I go like, is this some type of animal populations have their own type of control on overpopulation, right? And the way that human population was evolving, if we just kept growing the way that we were growing, you know, Earth has limited resources. It was going to be, a challenge, right? Do you as a scientist see some sort of weird species, some sort of auto control in there, or am I pushing things too far and getting like too crazy on that type of thinking?
It's interesting. Now you're making me think back of my undergraduate ecology class where I learned something called the Lotka-Volterra model, which is exactly the dynamics, modeling the dynamics that you mentioned. Then I'm thinking about graduate school where I learned about what they call population ecology, which is a direct application of Lotka-Volterra to organizations, right?
Right.
And right now, humans have no predators
Right.
unless you go swimming and you get eaten by a shark, or unless you're actually in Siberia and a Siberian tiger stalks you and eats you, right? Um,
Yes.
but really, humans have no predators. Humans generally don't die of starvation. Um, although, like in some parts of the world, you do get that, right?
Yep.
So there's effectively no control on our population except our own proclivity not to breed.
Yeah.
So these are all interesting questions. I don't know, but something I keep on thinking about is the line from the original Matrix. Not the sequels because they weren't that very good, but the original Matrix that's always going to be a classic.
Yeah.
Agent Smith, who is literally an agent, uh, thinking rational AI model, right? Designed to do a certain task, says human beings are a disease.
Yeah.
You're like a virus,
Yeah.
right? And by the way, I love using movie clips to teach.
This
So
is
that is a clip that I show.
JC. This is getting so scary. Now you are pushing me into simulation thinking and stuff, and turning me to another direction. But I love it. No, it's such an interesting.
Some of the guys who are from Silicon Valley put together a very scary scenario model,
Right.
and it's almost like a choose your own adventure kind of like book where you make certain decisions and the ending changes. I forgot what the so AI 2027 or something like that. Um, but take a look at it. And some of the futures they mention is like reasoning models gone out of control, reasoning models out of alignment with what the humans want it to be, and basically they turn on humans by creating bioengineering a virus to wipe us all out,
Yeah. Yeah.
while they're actually because they're so much smarter than we are, right?
Yeah.
But I think I'm not ready to really think about that seriously. A lot of these companies have an ulterior agenda. The more regulation there is in an industry, the less likely that people will be able to catch up to you, right?
Yep.
So I don't buy all these completely, but I do think that with the rapid advance of reasoning models, we do need to kind of like think about it. But there's also a very positive future where human beings don't have to do the grunt work anymore. They leave the grunt work to AI while human beings go out and do really cool and fun stuff and make the important decisions. In other words, if you have Jarvis as the AI, we can all go around flying around in Iron Man suit. So that's kind of the optimistic vision. And a lot of it will depend on how we do things.
Yeah.
In education, there is no question that many students are not being well served by the current system. So many resources are diverted into stuff that isn't productive, right? That being said, if the university can adapt, evolve feathers, turn into birds, learn how to fly, and if some of the non-university players can actually also adapt, um, maybe we'll actually get another blossoming of university life where higher education better fits the needs. I don't think it needs to be an apocalypse because there's mammals who survived, and there's what's my birds that have survived, right?
Yeah. Dinosaurs
And
turn into birds. Um, JC, we are almost out of time, but I wanted to ask you like one final question, right? You are such an amazing professional educator, and you are seeing the forefront of how AI is being used. So if someone is listening, right? What would be your advice to them on how to leverage AI, but still keep that critical thinking that is required to leverage AI the right way? What would be in a few words your advice to them on how to do that?
well, I think the short answer is just make sure you're constantly thinking. Don't take anything for granted. Think about the way you're thinking, because if you're thinking about the way you're thinking, if you're making yourself kind of like question everything, then when the time comes where AI is going to be integrated into your workflow, you'll be in a good position to do it. The long answer is you can read my paper with Sean McMinn um, that actually recently came out in the Journal of Financial Transformation. Um, the other article that's really good is Microsoft Research just put out an article on metacognition. So both articles are on metacognition. And of course, if you're an educator looking to kind of get yourself more ready without challenging your university's processes or basically changing your workflows, check out PreGrade, pregrade.ai. There's a free trial. Well, if you're an educator, once we approve your educator account, you get 100 free essays.
Beautiful. JC, this has been an amazing conversation. I could keep going for ages. I actually hope that we can get together sometime again in the future and do another episode about a related but different topic and just keep having a conversation with you because it's such a benefit and enjoyment. So thank you.
Well, Mateo, thank you very much. And also thank you for bearing with me for being so hard to schedule. And I really appreciate the chance to be on your podcast. This has been a great conversation. If you're ever in Hong Kong, do let me know.